Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be responding to Jonathan McIntosh's How the Last Jedi Defies Expectations about Male Heroes. If you don't know who Jonathan McIntosh is, he was the writer and I believe producer for Anita Sarkeesian's videos before they eventually split up. And if you're lucky enough to not know or even forget who Anita Sarkeesian is, first let me say I envy you. Second, let me say I don't blame you. She hasn't done anything substantial in a while. And third, let me say she's some turbo feminist who complained about video games, espoused a ton of falsehoods about the media, and then played the victim when people pointed out all the reasons why she was wrong. And this is the brains behind the operation, so let's take a look. It's funny that he calls himself the pop culture detective. He used to call himself the pop culture hacker, and by hacker he means his high school buddies left their Facebook page open, so he quickly wrote on their own profile some lewd or derogatory message with a following, haha, I totally hacked you, even though it wasn't even remotely hacking. This is something only the youngins would get.
The Last Jedi is a movie that's designed to subvert audience expectations.
One of the important things I don't think Jonathan realizes is just because it was designed to subvert our expectations doesn't mean it did it well.
Nowhere is this more evident than in the way the film handles its three male heroes: X-Wing pilot Poe Dameron, renegade stormtrooper Finn, and legendary Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker. Initially, all three characters seem like they should fit neatly into familiar archetypes for men in action-adventure films. In Poe, we expect the hotshot fighter pilot who's celebrated for blowing up the bad guys.
While we did expect him to have some sway or some recognition among the rebellion or resistance or whatever they decide to call themselves that minute, due to the fact he did in fact blow up the planet-grade Death Star the First Order made in The Force Awakens, we didn't really get much of an idea of who he is or what his character is like, nor do we get much of a character arc to solidify the sort of trope he fits under in The Force Awakens, due to the fact that he was missing for the vast majority of the movie. He is, or was, in that film, a one-dimensional character due to the fact that he left just as soon as he came, and it's very likely that the fact he survived at the very end of the film was due to a rewrite late in the development of the movie rather than the initial idea.
In Finn, we expect the noble defector who's determined to take down an unjust system.
First of all, quadruple go fuck yourself for using Avatar as in any way a positive depiction of anything. That movie was objective shit. Second of all, no. There was nothing in The Force Awakens, the debut of Finn and his character arc, that displayed anything remotely like a noble defector. He cowered out of his duties in the First Order because he didn't like the sight of his own teammates being shot and shooting at people. And he spent the rest of the film following Rey like a puppy because he wanted to defend her, because he was infatuated with her. He didn't have any higher goals. He didn't have any grander ideals in the film. Did you watch the same movie I did? Because Finn wasn't exactly noble defector material. It actually would have been more interesting if they focused on that fact in the film, and the second film was largely about him finding a purpose in life, a higher purpose than trailing behind Rey and hoping she doesn't get shot to death. But alas, that is not the film we got.
And in Luke, we expect the wise warrior who wields tremendous power in the name of fighting evil. But in each case, The Last Jedi doesn't deliver on those expectations, at least not immediately. Instead, director Rian Johnson throws fans a series of curveballs.
I think one of the biggest problems of The Last Jedi is Rian Johnson's insistence that has to be a series of curveballs. It can't just be one grand twist that no one saw coming. Everything has to be subverted. What is not one of the most iconic, the most iconic twist in cinema history? It is quite clearly the reveal that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. Everyone and their mother knows that twist. You can go to the butthole of Africa and ask uncontacted people who Luke Skywalker's father is, and they'd be able to answer, it's Darth Vader. It's that iconic. And that is the biggest twist of The Empire Strikes Back. There's a smaller twist with the fact that Yoda, this small, green, crazy Muppet of an alien, turns out to be the Jedi Master that Luke Skywalker is supposed to see. But that pales in comparison to what the reveal of Darth Vader being Luke's father is. There's also the twist that Lando was not necessarily a traitor, but his hand was kind of forced to work for the Empire under dire threats, and that going to Cloud City was sort of a trap for Han and Leia and the gang. But again, that absolutely pales in comparison to Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father. Now, what in The Last Jedi could possibly compare to that? I would argue nothing, and instead he just sort of crammed in as many small subversions as he could possibly achieve. The ones you listed out here, McIntosh, but also quite a few more, like Luke Skywalker doesn't revere the lightsaber, have any emotional attachment to it. He just tosses it over his shoulder like some comedy. Holdo wasn't a traitor or villain at all. She was actually one of the good guys and really did have a plan all along. Snoke doesn't get a backstory explanation. He's killed pretty much in the final 25% of the film. Rey's parents are literally nobodies. It's all just, these twists after twist after twist. I would argue as if Rian Johnson was specifically scouring the internet for all these fan theories that people have written after The Force Awakens and deliberately tried to do none of them for the sake of subversion. But let's continue.
Over the course of the first act, Finn reveals his self-centered and defeatist attitude. Poe proves that he's reckless and arrogant, and Luke is so consumed by paralyzing guilt that he's renounced the Jedi and become a hermit. These unexpected character twists are part of the reason why some Star Wars fans left the theater in a state of shock, which rapidly mutated into fits of rage on the internet.
I love how he completely jumps to super angry, pissed off fanboy that's just raging and raving and ranting about The Last Jedi as if there was no possible way to talk about any of the calm, well-constructed criticisms of the movies and its failings. And he also uses Kylo Ren, slashing up the room as the imagery for the fanboy upset at The Last Jedi. Stay subtle, McIntosh. Stay subtle.
Now, to be clear, we're not talking about people who just happen to dislike The Last Jedi.
After all, if you focused on them, you might have to address their valid criticisms, and that would put a huge dent in your attempt at justifying the movie and claiming it isn't an irredeemable pile of shit. And we can't do that, now can we, McIntosh?
It is, after all, not a perfect piece of cinema. No, we're talking about the subset of mostly male superfans who felt betrayed and personally disrespected by this movie.
Well, I'll give him one thing. I felt ripped off after seeing the movie. I felt like the director had no respect for the audience of the film. I felt like the director had no respect for the characters in the film.
Anything else?
The objections from that particular group are wide-ranging.
The two were accompanied by a girl.
But they often involve an obsessive level of scrutiny when it comes to female characters.
What girl?
On the more extreme end of the spectrum, fan complaints have a tendency to devolve into wild conspiracy theories about the Disney Corporation pushing an agenda of forced diversity or feminist propaganda.
And do you have any rebuttals to this idea? Anything to show that actually is a harebrained conspiracy theory? Or do you just want to claim it's a conspiracy theory and leave at that? Because the director J.J. Abrams has been quoted, has said in an interview that he doesn't like the fact that Star Wars is so quote-unquote white in the original trilogy and the prequels, and he wants to add a ton of diversity into it. That, in of itself, is a pretty bloody telltale admission that there is, in fact, an agenda in these new films. And also, are you really surprised that the female characters getting so much scrutiny when A, they're poorly written and quite shitty, and B, one of them is the protagonist of these new films? You mentioned Poe and Finn and even Luke Skywalker in the opening of your video, but you suspiciously left out the protagonist of this new trilogy, Rey. What about her? What subversive qualities does she hold other than the subversive idea that somebody who doesn't know what the Force is and just learned about it hours ago shouldn't have immense power beyond any character we've seen in any media before?
But there is a common thread running through much of the backlash that speaks to an underlying anxiety. An anxiety rooted in deep-seated insecurities about masculinity. Let me briefly explain what I mean by that. Leading men in action-adventure movies are expected to be decisive, righteous, respected, and to take charge in most situations. Men are expected to achieve success by becoming progressively more and more powerful as the story unfolds.
Yes, McIntosh, it is in fact much better storytelling if the lead character grows as a person and becomes stronger as the story progresses, rather than having all of his powers leveled up completely at the very start and facing no challenge or adversary. Good job, you have passed Storytelling 101. But I'd like to point out that this whole idea that the protagonist is supposed to take charge and, be the known hero of everything isn't necessarily expected. There's quite a few protagonists in media who aren't that sort of character. Not the least of which Luke Skywalker, who spent most of episode 4 getting his ass kicked and needing to get bailed out by his friends and allies, most of episode 5 absolutely failing, and only really kicking significant ass in episode 6.
This expectation is part of a long-running tradition in Hollywood, and the formula is so entrenched in mass media that many fans feel aggressively entitled to seeing that particular version of manhood reproduced on the big screen. But as The Last Jedi begins, it quickly becomes apparent that this movie isn't interested in catering to a simple vicarious power fantasy. All three male heroes are presented as vulnerable in their fallibility, with each displaying their own set of rather significant character flaws and inadequacies.
McIntosh, literally no one cares that the male characters in this film have character flaws. That is what makes them interesting and relatable. But they never really overcome those flaws. I mentioned Finn running away from danger, tailing behind Rey due to infatuation, not really having a larger goal in mind. He never really ends up with that larger goal. He never really gets that ultimatum of, alright, this is what I'm going to stand for, no more running, it's time to put my foot down and do what I think is right. He almost had that in The Last Jedi, but it was subverted by fucking Rose, of all characters. Bloody fucking hell. But can you find me a comment or a criticism or anything, a video where somebody complains that the male characters have character flaws? That they are human beings with their own quirks and weaknesses? Because as of so far, that, as far as I've seen, and I've seen quite a few criticisms of this movie, that is not what people are complaining about when they talk about the likes of Finn or Poe or Luke. No one's masculinity is threatened by the fact that a male character undergoes some growth as the film goes on. Even in films like Starship Troopers, the characters go through some sort of growth and character arc and become better men as the film goes on. And those characters, I would argue, have much more of a go-get-'em attitude than the likes of Luke Skywalker or Anakin Skywalker in the Star Wars films.
Now, flawed heroes, in and of themselves, aren't all that unusual in speculative fiction. In fact, failure, and then learning to overcome that failure, is just the standard recipe for structuring a basic character arc. I'd argue the intense fan hate surrounding The Last Jedi has a lot more to do with the fact that the male heroes in this movie are directly challenged on their failures by women.
Leia.
This is not something that's supposed to happen to space cowboys or space wizards in Hollywood blockbusters.
According to who? You? Just because you haven't seen it quite as much as you would like, it's suddenly not supposed to happen, and suddenly a grand subversion of expectations, and thus the root of the hatred this film has garnered? Not the plot holes, not the poor characterization, not the breaking of the well-established Star Wars lore, not any of that fact. It's a fact that male characters have been told off by female characters, even though those male characters are supposed to be the specific tropes that you would initially imagine them to be, but would quickly realize they're not, 5 minutes into the bloody movie.
Okay, listen.
Women aren't supposed to interfere with a man's heroic journey.
Actually am a time traveler and went back to like 1979 or when A New Hope came out, and I absolutely remember all of the fans absolutely raging at the scene when they got Leia out of the prison and they were sort of in that shootout in the corridor. And Leia then takes a gun and shoots out a hole that leads to a trash compactor and says get in. Absolutely remember people getting absolutely pissed off at that because it was a woman taking charge in a situation that the man should be victorious in. Oh wait, actually literally nobody gave a shit. It led to a very interesting and memorable part of the movie. It made sense at the time to try to escape that shootout, and people came out of the film liking Leia as a character and not being overly upset that she took charge of what you assume to be a predominantly male role all the way back when the first Star Wars movie came out. It's nothing new, it's nothing controversial, it's something that's been in plenty of movies already, let alone the Star Wars films. You're just making things up, McIntosh.
So let's dig a little deeper into the unexpected ways that men are held accountable for their behavior in each of the movie's three intersecting storylines. As many critics noted when The Last Jedi first hit theaters, the theme of women challenging male bravado is most evident in the character arc of Poe Dameron. Poe is a hotshot fighter pilot. He's impulsive, he's arrogant,
Disengage now, Commander. That is an order.
and he cares more about being a big damn hero than he does about effective strategy or even the lives of his compatriots.
The very scene you've shown is of him blowing up the dreadnought and effectively saving what few resistance or rebellion members there are. So you say Poe is this hotshot pilot who is arrogant and so full of himself, but there's a reason for that. His methods work. The bomber ships that they sent out were effectively useless most of the time, and Poe's decision to continue attacking is what ultimately gave the resistance more hours to be able to run away from the First Order rather than being destroyed then and there.
The gung-ho rebel pilot is a familiar archetype in Star Wars media, and as a result, we think we know how it's going to play out. Audiences expect the good guys to bring down the enemy death machine in a giant ball of fire. And we expect to revel in the joyful spectacle of impossible explosions in outer space.
It does seem to be a recurring theme, even in The Force Awakens.
Direct hit! Dreadnought down!
But instead of framing Poe's daring raid on the Dreadnought as cause for celebration, the movie suddenly pulls the rug out from under us.
You're demoted.
Whoa, wait, we took down a Dreadnought.
At what cost? There are things that you cannot solve by jumping in an X-Wing and blowing something up.
But again, the reason that this scene is so controversial is because, from our perspective, Poe was in fact in the right. From our out-of-universe, inspecting absolutely everything, not this limited perspective the characters have point of view, we can tell that if Poe hadn't destroyed the Dreadnought and given the Resistance more time, the Resistance would effectively be dead. So him being punished for that is quite egregious, because we as the audience understand he's the only reason that Leia is able to stand around slapping him and demoting him. Do you not understand this, McIntosh? You see, the plot and the circumstances of the film are just as important as your gender studies analysis of the film. You have to take those things into account.
Poe is rebuked for his apparent victory, and by extension, the audience is rebuked for enjoying the fireworks. Those explosions that we were taking such pleasure in just moments ago are abruptly reframed as cause for self-reflection and sadness.
You are aware that all of the other explosive fights in the Star Wars series have also had casualties, right? Like, you show Rose's sister dying in the ball of fire twice in your video, but what about all the pilots who were with Luke Skywalker trying to take down the first Death Star? They had just as much screen time, if not more technically, and characterization than Rose's sister, and yet the Death Star blowing up was still something to celebrate and think of an overall good thing despite the sacrifices. Or, in fact, because of the sacrifices, because people have laid down their lives to take on this massive super weapon that threatens billions and billions of lives across the galaxy, and the good guys ultimately succeeded. So despite the casualties that the attack on the Death Star caused, I would assume we can all agree it was a good thing that Luke Skywalker was eventually able to fire his proton torpedoes into it or whatever and blow it up, and the Empire was defeated for a short while thereafter. So why then is Poe effectively rebuked for doing sort of the similar thing, being able to destroy the Dreadnought and save the lives of the Resistance and potentially the lives of anyone else who would cross the paths of the First Order without the Resistance there to oppose them?
And we find ourselves suddenly confronted with a narrative about consequences.
Except we also sort of saw that in The Empire Strikes Back. Luke Skywalker, this, more heart than head character, learns that his friends are in trouble while he's training with Yoda. Rather than continue his training and continue refining and honing his skills, he flies off to Cloud City in an attempt to save them, and gets into a fight with Darth Vader. He gets his ass handed to him by Darth Vader. He learns Darth Vader is his father. Han Solo gets kidnapped and frozen in carbonite. And the film ends with Luke, Leia, Chewbacca, and the droids looking at the galaxy, realizing that the Empire no doubt has the upper hand and could very well be downhill to the very end for them and their journey from there on. That is a consequence. Luke Skywalker not staying and heeding the advice of a master far more knowledgeable about these situations than him has had negative repercussions for not only him, but his friends, and not only that, but for characters we already know, we already empathize with, we already want to succeed. Not these literal no names and new names that we haven't even been introduced to yet.
For some Star Wars fans, it must have felt as if Princess Leia had just reached out of the movie screen and personally slapped them across the face. Now, it's noteworthy that blowing up the space fascist death ray isn't framed as morally wrong. Instead, we're asked to consider the tactical and human cost of that violence.
Try to remember that tactical and human cost. Is it a good plan? Is it a waste of resources? Is it a waste of life? Could it have been done better to avoid those wastes? Just keep that in your mind for a little bit.
If ever a beloved leader is incapacitated, we expect our brash hero to suddenly find themselves in command. But that doesn't happen either.
The chain of command is clear as to who should take her place. Vice Admiral Holdo of the cruiser Ninka.
Vice Admiral Holdo is even less sympathetic to Poe's attitude than General Leia.
I've dealt with plenty of trigger-happy flyboys like you. You're impulsive, dangerous, and the last thing we need right now.
She harshly chastises Poe for his recklessness and rightly dismisses his antics as a liability to their mission.
Which, again, doesn't make sense because the only reason they're able to continue their mission is because Poe was quick-thinking enough to destroy the dreadnought rather than fall back. It's actually quite a wonder why the First Order hasn't blown them up already with their various TIE fighters and much more capable and better weaponry and better ships that aren't running out of fuel in the middle of a space battle, but that, I suppose, is beside the point.
And this is really what's at the heart of why so many angry fans tend to hate Vice Admiral Holdo's character so much.
That's what you got? That's what you brought us to?
Get this man off my bridge.
Poe Dameron's story is that of a cocky, headstrong, never-tell-me-the-odds style male hero who is repeatedly reprimanded.
You have bet the survival of the Resistance on bad odds and put us all at risk?
Until he finally learns to listen to and trust women in positions of power.
This character dynamic would have gotten the exact same sort of scorn if Holdo was a man. In fact, it probably would have gotten even more scorn because idiots like you would have used it as an example of toxic masculinity or whatever other bullshit you seem to believe. The reason people are so pissed off at Holdo is simply because she was a poorly written character and an even worse leader. The Resistance is 3 ships, maybe a few hundred at the absolute most people. They are running out of fuel. They are being chased by the First Order, who for some stupid reason isn't able to just shoot them down now. And Poe is insistent on trying to meet Holdo halfway. He keeps asking her, do you have a plan to handle this situation? She is, after all, the current leader of the Resistance, the highest ranking member there is. Certainly, she would have a plan to save them all, but no matter how much he asks, she doesn't reveal anything. And then, one ship is destroyed, tons of lives are lost, tons of resources are lost. And he asks, do you have a plan? And she doesn't say anything. She just reprimands him. And then another ship is destroyed. And at the very end of the movie, it's revealed, oh, she does have a plan. She just, for whatever reason, never revealed it. There's no reason she never revealed it. There was nothing in the movie that explained why she never told anyone what her plan is. And we're just supposed to believe her. It turns out the message is you're just supposed to accept the word of your superior no matter what. That seems like much more an idea that would come from the First Order or the Empire rather than the Resistance or the Rebellion. But no, it's 'cause she's a woman, isn't it?
As Episode 8 begins, Finn is a man obsessed. He wants nothing more than to find his friend Rey and then get as far away from the war as he possibly can. Finn's intentions are selfish and driven by a lack of faith. He's convinced that the fight against the First Order is a lost cause.
Sorry, but this fleet is doomed, and if my friend comes back to it, she's doomed too.
Enter Rose Tycho, a low-ranking maintenance worker who's a fan of Finn's exploits from The Force Awakens.
Gotta get back to what I was doing, so...
What were you doing?
When she realizes he's not really the committed Resistance hero that she's heard stories about, her disappointment is palpable.
I mean, she literally zaps him with his taser gun for trying to save his own life, because don't you know, in the Resistance, you're not allowed to leave. But I do wonder how exactly this mythical Finn archetype spread throughout the Resistance, even though the film could not take place any longer than a week, and more likely it took place even less than that after The Force Awakens. Who knows? Certainly Rian Johnson doesn't, that's for sure.
Rose takes on the role of Finn's guide and mentor.
Come on.
Look, this whole place is beautiful. I mean, come on. Why'd you hate it so much?
Look closer.
She's the one who pulls back the curtain to expose the oppression festering just below the surface of the galaxy.
And who do you think these people are?
Did she really teach him all that much? Like, even in the very next clip after this, she says there's only one business in the galaxy that gets you this rich, and he's able to answer very quickly, war. He's more privy to the war economy of the Star Wars universe than most people are, and having been raised by space Nazis, he should be very well aware of what sort of bastards are out there roaming the galaxy.
There's only one business in the galaxy that'll get you this rich.
War.
Unlike Leia and Holdo, Rose holds no formal position of power.
Neither does Finn.
But she does speak from a position of moral authority.
I wish I could put my fist through this whole lousy, beautiful town.
She articulates the political and moral reasons why the resistance is necessary.
That's nice and all, but we don't really need it because we've already seen why they're necessary. You might forget, but in the last movie, the First Order used this Death Star planet and blew up several other planets. All of the planets associated with the top members of the Resistance, and killed billions and billions of people and aliens. That's kind of a good enough reason to understand, an argument to justify why there should be this other faction opposing those people.
And in doing so, she inspires Finn to finally identify as a rebel.
Well, until he actually does something heroic and larger than himself, like deciding to ram his little speeder into this mobile Death Star cannon and save the people in the rebel base. Then she has to interfere because, you can't have this male hero steal the spotlight. All of her morals and arguments and whatever she tried to teach him effectively threw out the window in that scene. But I'm sure you'll disagree.
Always scum. Rebel scum.
Oh goddamn, that was a cringy line. I hope Episode 6 resurrects Luke and someone says, "You're nothing but, a shit herder." And then Luke looks down and whispers, "Nerf herder."
And it's her role as moral compass to both Finn and to the audience that's responsible for a good portion of the rage directed at Rose's character from the more toxic side of Star Wars fandom.
The scene that really pisses off Star Wars fans and moviegoers in general was the scene I mentioned earlier at the end of the film when Finn is, going to sacrifice himself, and then Rose interferes, knocks Finn out of the way, and effectively ruins Finn's suicide run against the First Order. And the reason that pisses people off so much is because that would have been Finn learning from her and adhering to an ideal larger than himself. And this character who chastised him throughout the film as being a coward, as running away from everything, suddenly does a complete 180 for literally no reason at all, and ruins this moment that Finn could have had that would have been perhaps one of the few respectable scenes in this movie, bringing up to perhaps 3 scenes overall.
Many of these guys can't help but view a woman who is serving as teacher to a male hero as anything other than preachy, annoying, or emasculating.
Are you kidding me?
All unsubstantiated and based strictly off of your own preconceived ideology. There's nothing really to back this up. Can you point to me a criticism of The Last Jedi where someone said, "Oh, that bitch Rose Tico, it shouldn't be a woman teaching a man these values. It should be a man teaching a man or a woman, not the other way around"? Can you show me that at all, anywhere, McIntosh? Your reason people hated Alien Covenant was because it showed a robot in power, but we expect machines to be subservient, and therefore that's where all the hatred stems from. And the reason people hate the Transformers movie is because it shows strong, capable female characters, and that just riles up the toxic masculinity. Truly, that's why they hate it. You see, I can make this shit up too. I can make up complete fucking lies too. It's actually quite easy.
The fact that Rose also happens to be played by an actress of color only magnifies their anger. The other reason for the backlash against Rose is because she interrupts Finn's big heroic sacrifice.
Oh well, you finally decided to talk about the elephant in the room rather than pulling excuses and reasons out of your ass. Let's see how you justify this complete contradiction to what you were talking about earlier.
During the film's final battle, Finn embarks on a self-destructive charge. His heart is finally in the right place, but his judgment is clouded by his eagerness to act on his newfound convictions. As the movie makes clear, Finn's suicide attack is doomed to fail.
No. That wasn't made clear. There was literally nothing actually indicating that ramming your speeder into the enemy's weapons would fail. In fact, I would argue that Holdo ramming her ship into the Supremacy and that saving the Resistance kind of sets up a precedent that ramming ships into other ships or ramming machines into other machines is a viable tactic that ends up saving the day. So, where are you getting this from? Can you point to me what is exactly showing this isn't going to work?
Poe tells him so.
Now, pull her off! What? The cannon is charged! It's a suicide run!
Rose tells him so.
It's too late. Don't do this.
No! I won't let them win!
And if those clips are your reasons, I'm afraid it just isn't very good. Poe saying it's a suicide run means nothing because Finn was well aware that it's the end. You used a clip from Independence Day earlier in your video. Specifically, I think the one where the guy, flies up to the alien ship and says, "Hey guys, I'm back," and blows up the alien by ramming into their weapon. It was essentially like that. Neither character had any illusion or delusion that they would make out alive, and then Rose saying it's too late is effectively meaningless since we don't really know how long it takes for this weapon to charge up and when the break-off point is. Why is it too late?
And we see Finn's rickety airspeeder falling apart around him. But Finn is so focused on striking a blow against the First Order that he can't see how ineffective this strategy is.
He turns out to be fairly adept at physics and realize that slamming something into another thing at high speeds it's going to cause significant damage no matter how decrepit or broken down it is.
Understanding that his action amounts to a noble but senseless sacrifice, Rose steps in to save Finn from himself. The heroic sacrifice is part of a long tradition in media, wherein death is framed as a way for men to prove their bravery, their convictions, their love, and even their manhood.
Not just men, you raving misogynist, but women as well. The very same sort of heroic sacrifice you attribute only to men was also done by Ellen Ripley in Alien 3 when she decided to jump into that vat of molten lead when she had the Queen chestburster in her, rather than let Weyland-Yutani get it, or let it escape and produce a whole new batch of xenomorphs. But you probably didn't think about that scene due to your toxic masculinity and your unparalleled hatred of women, now did you, Jonathan McIntosh?
Hello, boys! I'm back!
And there's that very scene I talked about. He bloody contradicts himself in his own video by showing a character flying into the weapon of the enemy and blowing it up, despite it being a suicide run, but despite it being presumably too late as far as anyone else is concerned, despite him being outgunned by technology, outgunned by actual weaponry. But there's going to be a reason why this scene is okay in Independence Day, other than the toxic masculinity, and why the scene in The Last Jedi wouldn't be okay if Finn ended up saving everyone.
And movies tend to romanticize images of men going out in a blaze of glory.
He did it! The son of a bitch did it!
Even when their sacrifice is senseless, ineffective, or unnecessary.
How was Jack's sacrifice in the Titanic any of those? He was able to get Rose to some part of the ship that managed to break off and is able to sustain her weight and float above water, but he himself couldn't find that in time before hypothermia took over and he died. And before you argue that, he could have just gotten on the door with Rose, the combined weight would have caused the door to sink and them both to be completely exposed to the frigid ocean below. So no, he could not have done that.
This notion that death, and violent death in particular, is redemptive or restorative for men is so deeply ingrained in media that many angry fans are adamant that Finn's misguided kamikaze attack would have succeeded.
It's worth pointing out that the character in Mad Max Fury Road there has already gone through his redemption arc. There was no delusion that he wasn't one of the good guys. This is just his send-off, his final act to help the heroes, on top of all the stuff he has done to assist them beforehand. So saying that, it's his redemptive or restorative because there was nothing to redeem or restore. Whether Max or Furiosa or anyone else in tow, they were pretty well aware that he was on their side and had their best interests in mind. Also, why the fuck would you use Mad Max Fury Road in your fucking diatribe about how male fans are angry at women taking charge? Half of the movie was Furiosa taking charge of the situation from Max, showing Max how things are done, showing herself to be just as capable and able to withstand the brutality of the wasteland as this hero that we have followed throughout 3 movies so far. doesn't that sort of contradict it? Because Mad Max Fury Road is a well-loved film. Whether Mad Max fans, whether general moviegoers, whether male moviegoers, people left the theater completely pumped and hyped about this wasteland rumble featuring Mad Max and this new female character and all these other crazy post-apocalyptic types that can only be found in a Mad Max film. There wasn't any major, oh god damn it, why'd they have a woman lead Mad Max? There wasn't that level of disdain for that film, or any level of disdain for that film that there was for The Last Jedi, which really should get the neurons firing as to why The Last Jedi garnered so much hate, but Mad Max Fury Road did not. Jonathan McIntosh wouldn't think about this, but I hope you consider it for a little while. Here's a hint. One movie is well written, is entertaining, and treats the source material with respect as well as the audience, and the other movie does not.
Despite the film explicitly telling us otherwise.
Again, no it did not.
These fans are incensed that a woman got the big damn hero moment.
What big damn hero moment? She fucked everything and left her friends and allies vulnerable to the First Order's cannon weapon. She effectively ruined everything and made things far worse. And also, stop quoting TV tropes, you fucking mongrel.
And she got it, in their view, by robbing a male hero of his chance at martyrdom.
Why would you stop me?
I saved you.
I like how he cuts away before Rose says her infamous line, "We're going to win this war not by fighting what we hate, but saving what we love," which not only contradicts her teachings throughout the film, but also contradicts most of the Star Wars universe and all the sacrifices and battles that have taken place in it, including even the death of her own sister, who died fighting what she hates, the oppressive rule of the First Empire, and contradicts what Finn was doing, trying to save what he loves, which is his newfound appreciation for these higher ideals. I wonder why.
When Rey finally meets her hero, the legendary Jedi Knight isn't at all what she expected. Luke Skywalker has become a cynical old hermit. A man so consumed by fear and guilt that he's turned his back on the Resistance and closed himself off to the Force. Needless to say, this comes as a tremendous shock, both to Rey and to the audience.
Go away!
Like Rey, many Star Wars fans were expecting Luke to appear as a triumphant badass, the one they remember, or rather misremember, from the original trilogy.
No, fans are well aware that Luke Skywalker wasn't the, all-powerful, triumphant badass throughout the original trilogy. They are well aware that he was knocked down and the odds were stacked against him, and that made him more lovable because he kept getting up and kept fighting no matter what. In fact, it's something people frequently point out when criticizing the overpowered Mary Sue nature of Rey. The fact that she's able to overcome every single obstacle without issue, without trouble, despite Luke and even Anakin Skywalker having to face trial and tribulation throughout their journey in discovering their abilities with the Force. Sure, he's really bloody powerful in The Return of the Jedi, but that takes place years, mate, after A New Hope. Meanwhile, Rey is able to force pull and push objects, fight with a lightsaber, read people's minds, resist the Force, control people's minds within, at most, 2 hours, 3 hours of learning the Force exists. Sure, Luke was really powerful in Return of the Jedi, but he kind of earned that power. He went through the struggles, and even though he was super powerful in that film, he still faced problems. He wasn't completely kicking ass left and right. He still was pretty much forced onto that ship that Jabba the Hutt had, and was about to be tossed into the Sarlacc pit. He wasn't completely kicking ass and taking names and this all-powerful badass male hero that you think that fans think he's supposed to be.
The thing is, Luke was never really depicted as a great Jedi warrior.
Han, can you reach my lightsaber? Yeah, sure.
When Luke says this,
You think what? I'm gonna walk out with a laser sword and face down the whole First Order?
his words are a reaction to Rey's assumptions. But those lines can also be read as a response to fan expectations. As I mentioned earlier, it's assumed that Hollywood heroes, especially men, will grow exponentially more powerful over time. The expectation is that once a man has conquered his demons, those demons will stay conquered forever.
And when you do a complete 180 on a character, or even walk completely backwards on their development before even their starting point in previous films, that's without any good reason at all, that's really indicative of poor writing, which is a criticism of Luke's characterization. Fans would accept Luke Skywalker as this grouchy hermit who's become disillusioned with the Force, but such a characterization deserves far more attention than The Last Jedi gave. Luke Skywalker being the optimist, wanting to save the day, wanting to protect the galaxy, is integral to his character, so to remove that from him and show him as someone completely different, you can't do that in 2 fucking flashbacks. You just can't. You have to give it more attention. That's what pisses people off. It was poorly done. Their explanation was shitty. There's no good reason, as far as fans are concerned, why he should be like this, especially since it sort of contradicts the previous fucking movie with the fact they literally made a map showing people where he is. What'd he do that for? A hobby? This film is poorly written and you're hiding behind, "Oh, I bet you didn't see that coming," as a fucking excuse for its shit writing.
But even though Luke rejected the dark side back in Return of the Jedi,
I'll never turn to the dark side.
his struggle to resist the temptation of absolute power isn't over.
I'm starting to think we really did watch 2 completely different movies, because at no point was Luke tempted by absolute power. You see, in the Last Jedi movie that everyone else watched, and not the special edition that Jonathan McIntosh watched, Luke Skywalker rejected the Jedi entirely and thought that the Jedi and Sith should just end, and wanted to do his part by not being part of the Jedi and not trying to utilize the Force to anyone's benefit. You can't even represent the movie you're defending properly. Holy goddamn.
The briefest moment of pure instinct, I thought I could stop it.
And he's still scared of the darkness hiding inside himself, just as he was as a young man back on Dagobah.
Luke Skywalker was scared of the darkness hiding in Kylo Ren, not in himself. Watch the movie, Jonathan McIntosh, with your eyes, with your ears. Take in the movie and critically think about it, rather than jumping to conclusions about what male viewers might think about it. It's unfortunate that there is not an equivalent term for illiteracy when it comes to being able to comprehend movies, because you are showing yourself most certainly to be that sort of person, a cinema illiterate.
Although this older version of Luke Skywalker is consistent with his characterization from the original trilogy,
no, it's not. What scene in the original trilogy did Luke tell someone pleading for his help to essentially fuck off? What scene in the original trilogy did Luke Skywalker say, screw the Jedi, screw the Sith, I'm not getting involved in this? Can you show me where that characterization is in the original trilogy? You are making things up, Jonathan. You're living in an imaginary world.
angry fans still believe that The Last Jedi represents a downgrading of his power and his status.
Well, he did go from hero of the galaxy to angry old hermit, but let's not think of facts now.
But I didn't see you.
The fan fury is exacerbated by the fact that it's a young, untrained female Jedi
You've closed yourself off from the Force.
who challenges this mythic hero on his failures.
Of course you have.
Not only does this young woman reprimand the great Luke Skywalker,
Leia sent me here with hope. If she was wrong, she deserves to know why. We all do.
she directly confronts him and inspires him to reconnect with the Force.
Nothing about how overpowered she is, nothing about how poorly done these scenes were, nothing about the fact that such a journey of Luke Skywalker ought to have more screen time than it did, rather than the bumbling adventures of Finn and Rose in the casino planet, or the epic "we're running out of gas soon" space chase. That would cast a little bit of doubt onto his angry male fan theory that he seems so dedicated to.
Later on, Yoda offers guidance too, but it's Rey who opens the door for Luke to overcome his paralyzing self-doubt.
I don't know, man. Seemed like R2-D2 was the one who first said something substantial to him. I'm joking, but that's sadly like the best scene in the entire bloody movie, when R2-D2 tried to remind Luke of who he was by showing the original recording Leia gave, asking Obi-Wan for help, that ultimately spurred Luke into this adventure in the galaxy.
Now, reach out.
So instead of seeing the old Jedi Master teaching Rey how to wield the awesome power of the Force,
How the fuck would they even show that, considering Rey is more adept in the Force than any Jedi or Sith we've seen in these movies? I wouldn't be surprised if Episode 9 takes place 5 minutes after Episode 8, and Rey suddenly knows how to use Force lightning and can use the Force to slam two planet Death Stars the First Order suddenly made together and blow them up. Or some other complete fucking horseshit.
I feel something.
audiences are treated to scenes in which Rey reminds Luke what it means to be a Jedi.
The galaxy may need a legend.
Of course, Rey isn't a more powerful Jedi than Luke.
That is, unfortunately, debatable.
And she ends up being wrong about her ability to fix Kylo Ren. But she does possess something that he's lost. Rey still has hope, she still has conviction, and she still has clarity of purpose.
Boy, it sure would have been really interesting to see the journey of a character who was all about hope, all about clarity and conviction, all about having a purpose, turn into the grumpy hermit that he was in this film, but unfortunately Rian Johnson sucks ass at writing and couldn't bother dedicating any substantial time to that, loss of characterization. Like, it may seem like the most obvious thing in the world to say, but the reason Rey is that sort of character and not Luke is because that's how they wrote them. And what's not obvious about it, at least to you, is that the way they wrote them is fairly arbitrary and simply done in order to make Rey look good compared to this fan-favorite classic character who inspired a whole generation. These movies simply cannot exist without shitting on the old characters. It is sort of the dark humor of the universe. I wonder if it briefly grew sentience and fought back, that Carrie Fisher died but not Mark Hamill or Harrison Ford, and yet Luke and Han Solo are dead in these movies, but Princess Leia isn't. Just a final fuck you, I guess. I wonder who else will have their character ruined in Star Wars. They say they're bringing Lando back and using the original actor, so I'm pretty sure his character is going to be ruined. It's not going to be suave or, really charming or anything like that. I bet they're going to ruin Chewbacca's character. I bet they're even going to ruin the droid's character. R2-D2 and C-3PO are going to go through a severe character assassination, and then maybe an actual assassination while we're at it.
The idea that a young woman like Rey would have something important to teach an older, mythic male hero like Luke Skywalker is erroneously viewed by some male fans as emasculating.
Citation: The University of Jonathan McIntosh's colon.
It's worth pointing out that angry fan defensiveness isn't necessarily just a reaction to women existing in popular science fiction stories. If women are included alongside male heroes in a way that doesn't overshadow, upstage, or interfere with traditional expressions of masculinity.
Let's get one thing straight. I'm in charge out here. You do everything I say exactly as I say it.
Excuse me?
Just relax.
Then we don't see these same kind of extended temper tantrums from male fans.
And your clip of the guy who knows more about how to handle and fight dinosaurs than the other person saying, "Follow my lead," that's an example of a male asserting his dominance. It would be exactly the same if the sexes were reversed. If someone is much better at handling dinosaurs and being able to stop them from killing you than the other, then it would be best to follow that person's lead when you're in a situation where dinosaurs are able to kill you.
Especially if the female characters in question are cast as young, white, and conventionally attractive.
If only we could have more disabled, trans, fish-eyed, unibrowed, queer women of color, and specifically the color from The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft, a color so severe it would, disintegrate every bit of toxic masculinity of all the viewers in the wonderful world of Jonathan McIntosh. Also, using the Avengers as an example is also fucking poor, considering that each of the members of the Avengers had roughly the same amount of screen time. There wasn't much upstaging by any of them. Well, except Tony Stark to, I think, Bruce Banner when he decided to learn this advanced quantum physics stuff in like a night. That was a bit upstaging.
The Last Jedi isn't satisfied with simply including women. It goes much further, and puts female characters in positions of institutional power or moral authority over male heroes.
As opposed to the other Star Wars films where female characters were all in lower positions of power and were always in the wrong. Certainly weren't no princesses amongst farm boys and rogue traders, nor princesses among slave boys and droids and these Jedi Knights, nor, upstanding citizens of galactic politics amongst starry-eyed dreamers and cynical, cheating, conniving bastards. Nothing like that in the old Star Wars films. This is progressive.
The movie then has those women leverage that power to challenge and ultimately force change in men's behavior.
Again, nothing like that. There certainly wasn't any scene of Leia telling off Han Solo about one ass he was and say The Empire Strikes Back or anything like that. Nothing at all.
Tell me the truth.
And that is almost unheard of in a major blockbuster film. In the end, our three male heroes face up to their mistakes and overcome their failures. Poe learns from Leia and Holdo to put aside his desire for heroic short-term gains.
Let's go. No, wait.
And instead consider the bigger picture.
And that's the only clip or indication you'll see of that.
It's only through Rose's moral insights that Finn comes to believe in something bigger than himself.
But we're not going to let him actually perform any action to show that, oh no.
And Rey succeeds in inspiring Luke to be the best version of himself again.
Nah man, that was all R2-D2. Little droid was looking out for him.
And ultimately to do the exact thing he mocked her for earlier in the film. Luke does indeed end up walking out with a laser sword and facing down the whole First Order.
Except he doesn't really, because that's a force projection or whatever it's called of Luke, and not actually Luke Skywalker. He's supposedly safely back on the planet he decided to strand himself on, but even that's subverted because he ends up dying anyways. It would have been a lot more meaningful, I'm just saying, if it actually was Luke, and if he actually did demonstrate some incredible power at taking down the First Order.
Despite what the reactionary conspiracy theorists claim,
what a bloody mouthful, isn't it? It's the Illuminati ruining our Star Wars!
This is not an agenda of masculine inferiority.
Your entire fucking video is explaining how it defies masculine tropes, how it's not men leading things but women, how it's men being reprimanded by women in power, how this is all something deliberate that the writers did to subvert a common theme in movies. If it's deliberate, then it's a fucking agenda. If they specifically decided on these ideas and they follow along with your interpretation of what they mean, then they no doubt had an agenda to emasculate the male characters in favor of these powerful women. You can't have it both ways. Either Rian Johnson subverted our expectations by kicking men down a notch in favor of women to defy the common tropes of cinema, or there was no grand plan to this. It really was all an accident, and there is no agenda. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It's one or the other. Pick one, Jonathan. Pick one.
Women in The Last Jedi hold their male counterparts accountable not out of animosity, but because they genuinely care about them.
I like him.
Me too.
What a shitty, bloody scene.
Male heroes are not being diminished or erased in this movie.
Again, your entire thesis is that the common idea of the male hero rising to power, being in the right, taking charge of the situation is subverted, and therefore the idea of the male hero is most certainly diminished. You can't have it both ways, Jonathan.
In fact, a lot of time and effort is devoted to giving men transformative arcs.
Which was also done in all the other movies and done much better in this one.
The Last Jedi is a story about men learning to trust women's ideas and decisions, and then becoming better people and better heroes because of it. And while that might be an unexpected message for a Star Wars story, it's a vital lesson that men need to learn if we are to achieve gender equality. Thanks for watching. These video essays take a ridiculous amount of time to write, edit, and produce.
Fuck off, Josh. Anyways, I don't think The Last Jedi is an easy movie to defend. There are objective issues with the film. I personally don't like it, but there are very clear plot holes. You can find plot holes in this movie like you can find water in an ocean. And trying to excuse the bad rating of this movie as being some grand subversive idea doesn't work when the subversive ideas fall flat, when they're not satisfying, when they don't subvert anything interesting, when they in fact cause more problems than they solve. And then trying to frame this in some SJW gender studies mindset of, oh, we're actually, having women in charge and teaching men things, and that's totally not something found in other movies, makes it all the worse, especially when he misrepresents the movie he's talking about, he misrepresents movies he's referencing, he misrepresents his own bloody thesis by saying there's no agenda, even though he argued throughout that this was a deliberate idea, that these ideas of empowering women at the expense of the conventional idea of the male hero, is something that the writers specifically went out of their way to do. It's just misrepresentation abound, and perhaps the worst of all, misrepresenting the critics of The Last Jedi as being all loud, obnoxious, angry misogynists who can't stand the idea of women being shown in any position of power or having an edge against any of the male characters. He took all of the criticism this film has garnered and squeezed it down into that single archetype, angry fanboy archetype that he loves so much because it's easier to argue against than, say, hours worth of videos pointing out the flaws in the writing and the characterization of the film. It's much easier to argue when your opponents are imaginary angry fanboys. Well, thankfully, I don't have to pretend that my opponent is some, brain dead, downright scummy, lying, dishonest, social justice warrior, soy boy, cuck, whatever you want to call him, because it's pretty bloody clear that's who he is. So that's the end of this video. I hope you liked the video, that gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.